हरे हरे कृष्ण. So welcome to this evening's Bhagavad Gita class. We'll discuss today we'll discuss from chapter 5 verse number 19. Before we begin, we chant Jai Radha Madhava. Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivarandhari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivarandhari Yashodanandana Vraja Janaranjana Yashodanandana Vraja Janaranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivara Dhari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivara Dhari Yashodanandana Vraja Janaranjana Yashodanandana Vraja Janaranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Jaya Gauranithai Jaya Gauranithai Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Jaya Prabhupada Jai Om Vishnupada Paramhamsa Parivijakacharya Ashtottara Shata Srimati's Divine Grace A.C. Bhakti Vedanta Swami Maharaj Srila Prabhupada ki Jai. Jai Om Vishnupada Paramhamsa Parivijakacharya Ashtottara Shata Srimati's Divine Grace Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Goswami Thakur Maharaj Srila Prabhupada ki Jai. Ananta Kodi Vaishnavamrita ki Jai. Srimad Bhagavad Gita ki Jai. Thai Gaur Premanande. Today, Hari Gaur. Today we will be reading from Bhagavad Gita, chapter 5, verse 19. Chapter 5 is titled as Karma Yoga, Action in Krishna Consciousness. So we will read the verse and then the translation and then the purport. Ihaiva tairjitah sargo yesham samye sitam manah nirdosham hi samam brahma tasmad brahmani te sthitaha. Ihaiva tairjitah sargo yesham samye sthitam manah nirdosham hi samam brahma tasmad brahmani te sthitaha. Ihaiva tairjitah sargo yesham samye sthitam manah nirdosham hi samam brahma tasmad brahmani te sthitaha. We'll see if we can read the word for word translation. Iha, in this life, eva, certainly, taihi, by them, jitaha, conquered, sargaha, birth and death, yesham, whose, samye, in equanimity, sthitam, situated, manah, mind, nirdosham, flawless, he, certainly, samam, in equanimity, Brahma, like the Supreme, tasmat, therefore, Brahmani, in the Supreme, they, sthitaha, are situated. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Maharaj, Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Translation. Those whose minds are established in sameness and equanimity have already conquered the conditions of birth and death. They are flawless like Brahman, and thus they are already situated in Brahman. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. Equanimity of mind, as mentioned above, is a sign of self-realization. Those who have actually attained to such a stage should be considered to have conquered material conditions, specifically birth and death. As long as one identifies this body, he is considered a conditioned soul. But as soon as he is elevated to the stage of equanimity through realization of self, he is liberated from conditional life. In other words, he is no longer subject to take birth in the material world, but can enter into the spiritual sky after his death. The Lord is flawless because he is without attraction or hatred. Similarly, when a living entity is without attraction or hatred, he also becomes flawless and eligible to enter into the spiritual sky. Such persons are to be considered already liberated, and their symptoms are described below. The further symptoms of those who are self-liberated, they'll be described in the next verse, that is 5.20. So let us chant Mangalacharan prayers, the prayers for auspiciousness. Om Ajnanatirandhasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Sri Gurave Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayyam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guroho Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavanscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sagana Raghunathanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Sri Radha Krishna Padan Sagana Lalita Shri Vishakhanvitanscha Namao Vishnu Padaya Krishna Pristhaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swamin Iti Namine नमस्ते सारस्वते देवे गौरवाणी प्रचारिणे निर्विशेष शून्यवादी पाश्चात्य देशतारिणे नमो महावदन्याय कृष्ण प्रेम पदायते कृष्णाय कृष्ण चैतन्य नामने गौरत्विषे नमः। हे कृष्ण करुणा सिंधु दीनबंधु जगत्पते गोपेश गोपिकाकांत राधाकांत नमोस्तुते। तप्त कांचन गौरांगी राधे वृंदावनेश्वरी वृषभानुसुते देवी प्रणमामि हरिप्रिये। वाञ्छाकल्पतरुभ्यश्च कृपा सिन्धुभ्य एव च पतितानां पावनेभ्यो वैष्णवेभ्यो नमो नमः। जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासादि गौर भक्त वृंद। हरे कृष्णा 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे हरे। मुखं करोति वाचालं पंगुं लंघयते गिरिं यत्कृपा तबहं वन्दे श्रीगुरुं दीनतारिणम्। So let us see the translation one more time. Those whose minds are established in sameness and equanimity have already conquered the conditions of birth and death. They are flawless like Brahman, and thus they are already situated in Brahman. So here we see the emphasis is on sameness and equanimity, that is related to the original word in the verse. Samye sthitam manah and samye and samam. श्री छोटा राधा कालाचंद जी भगवान की जय। श्री राधा गोविंद भगवान की जय। श्री राधा कालाचंद जी भगवान की जय। So we are in the fourth section of the chapter 5, the verses from 517 to 526. The emphasis Srila Prabhupada gives here is the liberation by focusing on the super soul. One who in knowledge devotionally fixes his consciousness on the super soul and remains materially equipoised, that person, that devotee attains liberation in the near future. So we are in the verse 519. Prior to that, there was a verse 518, one of the famous verses. And there is a, let me see, 519. Panditaha Samardarshina. So the focus on 5.18 was that of being equanimous to the different species of life and different human beings. And the species and caste, they are the two bases of mundane differentiation in the material world. We differentiate based on either the different species, we are human beings and others are animal species or fish species or the bird species. And then within the human society, we differentiate based on caste or the ethnic origin, race, gender, color of the skin, like that. So in the 5.18 as well as 5.19, the equal vision is emphasized, and one who is situated in equal vision attains liberation. That's the point of the 5.18 as well as 5.19. So we'll see what is the basis of this equal vision. So equal vision, equality is not on the basis of the material body, the equality that is talked about in the material world. We're all same, we're all equal. But the equality is based on the bodily designation. But the spiritual equality that is talked about in 5.18 and in 5.19 is at the spiritual level. That is meaning it is at the soul level. So what is the basis for this equal vision? To seeing every living entity equally. So spiritual equality of living entities is based on the fundamental identity of that living entity, which is the spirit soul residing in that body. And we see the Lord is neutral to all living entities. The Lord says, Sama Sarvabhuteshu, is equal or neutral to everyone. And Lord is present in the heart of all living beings as Paramatma, and thus treats everyone as a friend, regardless of the circumstances of the living entities. So the living entity, somebody maybe in the species of ant, somebody in the species of elephant, somebody is a species of human being, somebody is a species of demigod, or someone maybe in the species of the living entities in the higher planetary systems, Maharloka, Janaloka, Tapaloka, or Brahmaloka. But the Lord situated in the heart of the living entity, Paramatma, the super soul, he is equal to everyone. He is not having any inherent intrinsic dislike because that living particular entity is in the lower species of life. So bodies, because the bodies that we see for the mundane vision, the external material bodies of the different living entities are simply because of the material productions of different modes of material nature. Whatever one desires and whatever consciousness one develops in every life, based on that, the living entity gets the next body. And therefore, but the soul within the body is the same. Same in the sense, the root identity of any living entity is the soul residing in the body. So, similarly, there is the quality of equality between the soul as well as the super soul. However, that does not make the soul equal to super soul. The soul is always subordinate to the super soul. Jivera Swarupoy Krishnera Nityadas. Jiva is Nitya, the super soul, Paramatma is Nitya, but the position is Jiva is eternal servant of the super soul. So it is said that living entity and which is the soul and super soul, they are equal in quality, but not same in quantity. And so the example we have heard so many times in this regard is the drop of an ocean water in hand versus the ocean water. The qualitatively, the drop of ocean water in hand as well as the ocean water, in qualitatively they are the same, but quantitatively there is a vast difference. So similarly, the living entity is qualitatively one with the Supreme Lord, meaning the Supreme Lord is Sat Chit Ananda, the soul is also Sat Chit Ananda. But the super soul quantitatively is Vibhu, and the living entity is Anu, meaning it is tiny, infinitesimal, insignificant part and parcel of the super soul, of the Supreme Lord. On the difference between the individual living entity versus the super soul. The super soul is residing in all the bodies of all the living entities, whereas the living entity, it is limited to only one body. So the Supreme Soul, Super Soul, is Sarva Desha Kala Varti. He is present across all the time and all the places, whereas the individual jiva is only sarva kalavarti, means he exists at all times, but he is existing only in a limited field of activity or kshetra. This body is called as kshetra, means the field of activity. The individual living entities, kshetra, karya kshetra, is just the one material body, whereas the super soul can reside in all multiple material bodies and at all across the time. And super soul is the provider. Eko bahusyam vididhati kaman. Chetaso, chetaso, chetananam. So he is the source or the basis for the all living entities. And he is providing eternally for all the necessary things that a living entity needs for its subsistence. So now we'll see what is the focus, what are the learning points in the purport of 5.19. So in 5.19, equanimity of mind is very much stressed. It leads to self-realization. Or we can say anyone who is self-realized is equanimous or equipoised in all different situations of life. And you'll see importance of equanimity is emphasized across multiple verses in Bhagavad Gita as well as Srimad Bhagavatam. At this stage, one is considered to have conquered material conditions, specifically birth and death. I mean, the person who is situated in the equipoised, equanimous position is not afraid of some of the defects of the human life, which is birth and death. So we'll see, because this word sama comes in Bhagavad Gita so many times, and also you'll see many verses in Srimad Bhagavatam, we talk about sama, samadarshinaha, sukha dukkha samaha. So we'll try to discuss about what is implied by sama by seeing some other verses. In Bhagavad Gita 2.15, it says, Yam hina vethayante te purusham purusharashabha sama dukkha sukham dhiram so amrita tattvaya kalpate. O best among men, O Arjuna, the person who is not disturbed by happiness and distress and is steady in both is certainly eligible for liberation. So the point made is very, very much similar to the point made in 5.19. We'll quickly read the purport of 2.15. Because it is very relevant to what we are discussing in 5.19. Anyone who is steady in his determination for the advanced stage of spiritual realization and can equally tolerate the onslaughts of distress and happiness is certainly a person eligible for liberation. In the Varnashram institution, the fourth stage of life, namely the renounced order sannyasa, is a painstaking situation. But one who is serious about making his life perfect surely adopts the sannyas order of life in spite of all difficulties. The difficulties usually arise from having to sever family relationships, to give up the connection of wife and children. But if anyone who is able to tolerate such difficulties, surely his path to spiritual realization is complete. Similarly, in Arjuna's discharge of duties as a Kshatriya, he is advised to persevere even if it is difficult to fight with his family members or similarly beloved persons. Lord Chaitanya took sannyas at the age of 24, and his dependents, young wife as well as old mother, had no one else to look after them. Yet, for a higher cause, he took sannyas and was steady in the discharge of higher duties. That is the way of achieving liberation from material bondage. So here also we see in the purport Srila Prabhupada begins the purport with the emphasis of someone who is equipoised in distress and happiness. So we are today discussing, you have just come. Yeah, so we have discussing, in the everyday evening we have Bhagavad Gita class and one particular verse is discussed. Today we are discussing chapter 5, verse number 19. And chapter 5 is translated as Karma Yoga or action in Krishna consciousness. So we are seeing what is the basis of Karma Yoga. And in the 5.19 verse, it was very much emphasized the equanimity or equipoised nature of the living entity by which one becomes eligible to for the liberation. And we are seeing some of the other verses in the scriptures which corroborate the same point. So this equanimity that we just briefly discussed, let me just recap on some of those points. This equanimity is based on not at the material level. In material level, material world, we talk about we are all equal. But our equality is based on the bodily designation. But the spiritual equality or equanimity is based on the spirit soul. And because in every material body, there is Paramatma. And Paramatma is both situated within the heart of an ant as well as in the heart of a human being. So, because Paramatma is situated in every heart of all living entities, therefore, that is the basis of the equality. Also, every soul present in every material body is dear child of God. So we are all, even though it may look like the living entity is little ant, and there is elephant, is a huge body, whereas the human beings and the demigods have different bodies. But the soul is neither the ant, neither the elephant, neither the human being. The soul is eternal servant of God. So that is the platform of equanimity or equal vision. And thirdly, the soul that is in every material body is at the same size. So it is said that soul is, the dimension of the soul is 1/10,000th tip of the hair. So if you take the hair and look at the tip of the hair, divide that tip of the hair in 100 parts, and then take each part and then again divide in 100 parts, that would be 1/10,000. That is the size of the individual soul residing in the body. So at that level also, and it's not that the soul in the body of an ant is so small and soul living in the body of an elephant is huge. Soul is of the same size. The external manifestation of the material body, because of the guna karma in the previous lives, whatever consciousness one develops in one life, accordingly one gets the next body. So accordingly, someone's body may be tiny ant, other body is huge elephant, but the soul is the same thing. Soul has the same size, and every soul is as dear to God as any other soul. And then another perspective on the sameness between soul and super soul that we saw, that soul and super soul, they are also equal in one sense. The soul and super soul, they are equal in the sense of a quality. So the living entity and the Lord, they are equal in terms of quality, because soul also has the same quality as the Lord. Lord is Sat, Chit, Ananda. Sat means eternal existence, Chit means full of knowledge, and Ananda means full of bliss. So that is the nature of the Lord. And the individual soul is also Satchit Ananda. It's also eternally existence. It has all the knowledge, and it is blissful. Therefore, one of the Vedanta Sutra 12 says, Ananda Mayo Bhyasat. The nature of the living entity is to be blissful. So that is qualitatively same, but quantitatively different. Quantity means Lord is a reservoir of unlimited oceanic qualities, whereas the living entity has very few qualities, and the quantity of those qualities are also very tiny. Just an example Prabhupada gives is that if we have a drop of ocean water in our hand, then that ocean water drop has the same quality of saltness or whatever constituents, same as the ocean, but the ocean has unlimited water, whereas the water in the drop in the hand is just a tiny portion of the ocean. So similarly, the living entity has the same qualities, but the quantity of the quality is different. Quantity of quality in the living entity is just tiny, whereas the living entity in the Lord, all those qualities exist in an unlimited form. And also, we saw that, and we also checked the vital difference between the living entity and the super soul, the Supreme Lord, which is that the Supreme Lord in the form of super soul is residing in all the bodies of all the living entities, whereas individual soul is residing only in one body. So therefore, Lord is called as Sarva Desha Kala Varti, means He is eternally present at all times and across all the bodies of all the living entities. Whereas individual living entity is only Sarva Kala Varti. Living entity exists in one place. So I'm right now here, so in Dallas, so I cannot be in Houston. But the Lord is present in Dallas, in Houston, in New York, in Mumbai, in Delhi, in Moscow, all the planetary systems is present. Therefore, he's called Sarva Desha Kalavarti. And Supreme Lord is completely Swarat and Abhidnya. Abhidnya meaning he is fully cognizant of everything. He is omniscient. Whereas the living entity is not omniscient. Living entity has very limited scope of knowledge. Whatever happening in my body, I will know. But whatever happens in somebody else's body, I cannot know. Whereas the Lord knows what is happening in my body, what my thoughts are. Whereas every living entity exists anywhere, the Lord knows exactly what is going on in their body and mind. That is also the big difference between the individual living entity and the Lord. So how does one come to the position of being equanimous? We all want to be, like to be at the stage of being equanimous, equipoised, not affected by the dualities of nature and dualities of this material world. Because this material world, sometimes we are going to find sukha means happiness, dukkha means distress, unhappiness, and sometimes some people will respect us, makes us feel good. Sometimes some people will insult us, and so that will make us unhappy, hot and cold, different things. So how to become not affected by these afflictions of the duality of the material nature? And it is, Prabhupada says that by practice, if one takes to Krishna consciousness, then one can transcend all these dualities of the material world. And the process of Krishna consciousness begins with the chanting of Hare Krishna Mahamantra, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. And along with that, practice of four regulative principles: no meat, fish, eggs, no meat eating, no intoxication, no illicit relations, no illicit sex, and no gambling. These are the four principles to be followed. And then chanting of Hare Krishna Mahamantra, by which one begins its process of practice of Krishna consciousness. So with that, we are a little bit over time. So I was wondering if anyone has any questions, comments. Okay, thank you for coming. And now darshan will stay open until more than, next arti will be at 8:30. And around 8:40, 8:45, then the curtain will close. Hare Krishna. Srimad Bhagavad Gita ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Nithai Gaur Premanandi. Hari Hari Bol.
The following is a Sri Ishopanishad lecture on mantra number 13, given by His Divine Grace, Srila Tamal Krishna Goswami Maharaj Gurudev, recorded on November 25th, 1979 in St. Louis.
Anyarivahu sambhava Anyarivahu sambhava Anyarahura sambhava Iti shushuma jiranam Iti shushuma jiranam Vinastad vichachakshire Translation. It is said that one result is obtained by worshipping the supreme cause of all causes, and that another is obtained by worshipping what is not supreme. All this was heard from the undisturbed authorities who clearly explained it.
This important book that we're reading from is known as the Isha Upanishad. The Upanishads are a part of the ancient literature, philosophical literature of India, known as the Vedas. Veda or Vedanta means the end of all knowledge. And the Vedas give us information about the topmost knowledge of all, known as the cause of all causes. This particular verse today is very much important because it indicates that people are engaged in different types of worship. So sometimes it's said, especially to modern idea, that whatever you do, as long as you get into it, that is to say, if you do your thing, then all ultimately leads to the same result. It doesn't really matter what you do, as long as you believe in it and get into it fully, you'll derive the same result. This statement from the ancient Vedic texts indicates that actually there's a very different result obtainable according to the type of activity which you perform. That is not very difficult to understand. Just like we're coming today, we're coming today from Chicago. So the fact is that not all roads lead from Chicago to St. Louis. Some lead to St. Louis, some lead west to Nebraska from Chicago, and some lead east to Detroit. So to say that if you take any road you'll get to St. Louis, that's not a fact. So this is a common example. But the idea is that according to the Bhagavad Gita, those who worship particular objects of worship, they obtain that object. Just like supposing a college student, for example, he has as his goal to achieve a degree. So his energy is applied in that direction, and eventually he obtains that degree. Someone else may be anxious to obtain wealth, and so working very hard, he gradually acquires this wealth. Someone else may be very much enthusiastic for enjoying some easygoing life, being able to enjoy freely, say with a beautiful woman. So he arranges his life in such a way that he makes that relationship possible, and so he enjoys in that way. So we have to study not simply the fact of you can obtain what you want by your work, but what is the result of what you obtain. For example, anything, it is described within the Vedas, that anything within this material world that has a beginning also comes to an end. That means that, for example, this body has a beginning, and gradually we find that the body will dwindle and come to an end. Similarly, all of the enjoyments which are associated with this body, they also begin, they build up, and they gradually come to an end. So, this is described that ashashvatam, that this material world is not permanent, but it's temporary. Actually, we see that nature arranges things in such a way that according to the seasons, the foliage on the leaves becomes developed, then it passes through summer, gradually to fall, the leaves turn colors, and then in winter they fall off. Everything is going through this cycle: birth, growth, maintenance, reproduction, dwindling, and eventually death. But this is the nature of material life. On the other hand, although our environment is constantly changing, there is a constant desire on our part to always be able to hold on to what we have, especially those things which are good. I always give the example that many years ago I was walking in Boston in a park, and we saw painted on a stone, "John loves Mary forever." Because everyone is hoping that their loving affair with whomever it may be, whether it's their children or their parents or their girlfriend or boyfriend or husband or wife, that this relationship will last forever. Even there's some religions I've seen now that teach you that, don't worry, when you go back to heaven, you're going to go back with your wife, you're going to go back with your children, and you're even going to go back with the family dog. Because unless they offer this type of arrangement, then people become extremely depressed. What is the use of maintaining my relationship, they may think, with my family members or with society in general, if it's all temporary? And in fact, that type of idea also gives birth to a philosophy known as nihilism, where people think, what is the use of even living or existence if everything is temporary, if everything has to gradually be given up? Then one might as well commit suicide or be totally nihilistic in his approach to life. Very depressed state. So there's so many philosophers that write books on this, in this type of a mood of extreme hopelessness and frustration of life. In fact, if we look in the newspapers today, we'll see that most people are conditioned by this type of philosophy. It's a very hopeless type of philosophy. That's why you'll find that the youth of America, actually the youth all over the world, they're very destructive in their tendencies. They destroy the schools, the buildings. They destroy their own lives through so many harmful activities. Sometimes 10% of the youth of America now is attacking their parents. In other words, they're growing up in a world or in a society in which actually there are no permanent values. Everything is seen to be in a constant state of flux. So this creates chaos within the mind, because actually no one wants to give up something which is wonderful. Everyone wants to obtain happiness and never lose it. But no one is successful at this time at doing this. Therefore, gradually there's frustration. And this frustration leads to so many conclusions. You see, out of frustration, it's described that Dhyayato vishayan pungsa sangasteshu sanjayate sangat sanjayate kama kama krodha vijayate. That people contemplate the objects of the senses. That means that they're always looking for something to enjoy. So while contemplating the objects of the senses, they develop attachment to a certain object. That may be an inanimate object or an animate object. It may be alive or it may be just something within a store. So while gaining this attachment, the desire to possess it develops. And from this desire comes frustration. Because either you try to get something and you're unable to get it, or you try to get it and you get it and it's not as good as you thought it would be, or you finally get that object and then you lose it. In any case, the end